When I first heard about the town of Yuletide, nestled amid snow-laden hills and evergreen forests, it was during one of those casual conversations that drift from inconsequential topics to the realm of whimsy. My friend Claire, who was always searching for unique travel destinations, had mentioned it with a twinkle in her eye, as if she were unveiling a hidden gem. She described it as a place where Christmas never ended, where the streets were perpetually adorned with twinkling lights and festive decorations, and where every day felt like Christmas Eve. At the time, I dismissed it as another tourist trap designed to capitalize on seasonal nostalgia. However, the idea of such a place lingered at the back of my mind, a flickering ember of curiosity. It was during a particularly bleak December, when the city seemed more gray than white, and the holiday cheer felt manufactured, that the thought of Yuletide began to beckon me with an inexplicable pull. Without much deliberation, I decided to spend the weekend there, hoping to find a little piece of genuine joy amidst the artificial sparkle of the season. The drive was uneventful, save for the gradual transformation of the landscape. The highway slowly retreated, replaced by winding roads that cut through dense forests, the trees heavy with snow, their branches forming a canopy overhead. There was something comforting about the solitude of the drive, the way the world seemed to narrow down to just me and the road ahead. As I approached Yuletide, the first sign of its enchantment appeared. The air seemed to shimmer with a faint golden hue, and the snowflakes that drifted down from the sky glistened like tiny diamonds. The town itself emerged from the mist like a scene from a storybook, its quaint houses adorned with wreaths, garlands, and strings of lights that twinkled merrily. At the center, a towering Christmas tree stood, its ornaments sparkling in the fading light of the afternoon. The entire place seemed to hum with an undercurrent of joy, a melody only the heart could hear. I checked into the Yuletide Inn, a charming establishment that looked as though it had been transported from another era. The lobby was warm and welcoming, with a crackling fireplace and the scent of cinnamon and pine mingling in the air. The innkeeper, a kindly woman with a round, cheerful face, greeted me with a smile that seemed almost too perfect. She handed me a brass key, the kind you rarely see anymore, and wished me a merry stay. Settling into my room, I felt an unusual sense of peace wash over me. From the window, I could see the town square, where clusters of people gathered, their laughter rising into the night like notes of a harmonious carol. Despite the cold, I decided to take a walk, eager to soak in the festive atmosphere. The streets were lined with quaint shops, each more charming than the last. The toy store brimmed with handcrafted wooden toys. The candy shop tempted with an array of sweets displayed like colorful jewels, and the bakery filled the air with the irresistible aroma of freshly baked pastries. As I wandered, I noticed the people of Yuletide seemed to know each other. They exchanged warm greetings, their voices carrying a familiar ease that spoke of long-standing friendships. But as I wandered deeper into the town, under the canopy of twinkling lights, I began to notice subtle peculiarities. The people were friendly, overwhelmingly so, their smiles a little too wide, their eyes a touch too bright. They moved with an unsettling synchronization, as though choreographed by some unseen hand. When I stopped at a cafe for a cup of hot cocoa, the barista greeted me by name, despite my never having met him before. I assumed Claire had mentioned me during her visit, yet a part of me felt a prickle of unease. As dusk descended, I found myself drawn to the town square, where a small crowd had gathered around the Christmas tree. A choir stood at its base, their voices rising in a sweet, haunting hymn. As I listened, I couldn't shake the feeling that the song was meant for me, its melody curling around my heart like tendrils of mist. Returning to the inn, I tried to rationalize my unease. Surely it was just my imagination, fueled by the town's almost surreal perfection. Yet, that night as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it an eerie sense of foreboding. The next morning, I resolved to explore the town further, convinced that a deeper understanding of Yuletide would dispel my disquiet. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I was struck anew by the town's beauty. The snow glistened under the bright winter sun, and the air was filled with the sound of cheerful bells. Yet, as I walked, I noticed something troublingly familiar about the streets, the buildings, even the people. It was as though the town had shifted during the night, subtly rearranging itself. The toy store was now on the opposite side of the street, its windows displaying the same toys, but in a different order. The bakery had swapped places with the florist, and the people seemed to echo the same greetings they had the day before, their voices eerily the same. Disturbed, I tried to shake off the sensation, telling myself it was merely the product of a restless night. Still, I couldn't help but feel as though I were caught in a loop, replaying the same day, with only minor variations. Returning to the cafe, I found the same barista, his smile unwavering as he handed me my cocoa. Again, he called me by name, but this time, his gaze lingered too long, probing for something beyond mere recognition. As I left the cafe, a sense of urgency gripped me. I needed to leave, to escape the strange perfection of Yuletide. Yet, as I made my way towards my car, I found the streets shifting around me, leading me in circles, always back to the town square. The choir was there again, their haunting hymn resonating through the air, a siren's call that tugged at my soul. Desperate, I approached a man standing by the tree, his face familiar but unplaceable. I asked him how to leave the town, hoping for a direction, a way out. He smiled at me, his eyes glinting like polished glass, and said, "Why would you ever want to leave? Yuletide is home." The words echoed in my mind, unnerving in their simplicity. As I looked around, I realized with growing dread that the people of Yuletide watched me with an expectant air, as though waiting for me to accept their invitation, to become one of them. I retreated to the inn, my heart racing, unsure of what to do. I tried once more to rationalize the situation, to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding. Perhaps it was just the overwhelming atmosphere of the town, combined with my restless mind. Yet, deep down, a part of me understood that something was terribly wrong. That night, the wind howled like a living thing, carrying whispers that seemed to seep through the walls of my room. I tossed and turned, my mind a storm of confusion and fear. In the early hours of the morning, I finally succumbed to an uneasy sleep. When I awoke, the town was enveloped in fog, the familiar streets now shrouded in an ethereal mist. I dressed quickly, determined to find answers. As I stepped outside, I was struck by the silence that hung over Yuletide, a heavy, expectant hush. I made my way to the town hall, a stately building that seemed a likely source of authority. Inside, I found only a single person, the innkeeper who had greeted me upon my arrival. She stood behind a desk, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "How can I leave?" I blurted, my voice echoing in the empty hall. For a moment she said nothing, her smile unwavering as she regarded me. Then she spoke, her voice calm and soothing. "Yuletide is where you belong. You are home here." Her words hung in the air, a chilling echo of what the man at the tree had said. I turned and fled, pushing through the door and out into the foggy street, my mind racing. I needed to escape, to break free from whatever strange hold this town had over me. As I ran, the fog thickened, obscuring everything around me, turning the world into a shadowy maze. I stumbled through the streets, my desperation mounting with each step. Every turn brought me back to the town square, where the choir still sang, their hymn weaving through the fog like a spell. Exhausted, I collapsed onto a bench, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The townsfolk gathered around me, their faces serene, their eyes filled with an unsettling warmth. I was trapped, caught in the perfect, uncanny embrace of Yuletide. In that moment, a realization washed over me. Yuletide was not just a town, but a living entity, a place that existed somewhere beyond the ordinary realm. It was a world unto itself, where time flowed differently, where reality bent to its own rules, and I was now a part of it, unable to escape its unending Christmas cheer. The townspeople approached, their smiles welcoming, their voices blending with the choir's song. As they surrounded me, I felt a strange peace settling over my heart, a surrender to the inevitable. In Yuletide, it was always Christmas, and I was home. Even as I write these words, I feel the lingering pull of Yuletide, the uncanny warmth that has seeped into my bones. The world outside the town grows distant, a fading memory, while the endless cheer of Yuletide becomes my new reality. And so, with each passing day, I find myself merging with the town, my past life fading like a dream. The streets no longer shift beneath my feet, the faces around me now familiar, comforting. I am becoming one with Yuletide, a part of its eternal celebration. The fear that once gnawed at my heart has softened into acceptance, my resistance replaced by a gentle resignation. I am home, and though the world outside may continue to turn, I remain here, forever caught in the perfect, unchanging embrace of Yuletide. The choir sings on, their hymn echoing through the town, a melody that binds us all together in unending harmony. And as the snow falls gently from the sky, covering the world in a blanket of pristine white, I find peace in the knowledge that in Yuletide, Christmas is forever. I first arrived in the town of Hungry Horse, nestled deep within the sprawling beauty of Glacier National Park on a crisp autumn afternoon. The air was tinged with the scent of pine, and the golden leaves crunched beneath my boots as I walked towards the cabin I had rented for a month-long retreat. I had come seeking solace and inspiration, far from the bustling chaos of city life. The townsfolk were few, their faces marked by the rugged serenity of those who lived in harmony with nature. They greeted me warmly, but with a hint of reticence, as if guarding some shared, unspoken understanding. The cabin stood at the edge of the forest, its wooden facade weathered by time and elements. Inside, it exuded a rustic charm, with its stone fireplace and simple wooden furnishings. After unpacking, I settled into a routine of writing during the day and taking long walks in the evening, losing myself in the tranquil beauty of the park. The silence was profound, interrupted only by the occasional whisper of the wind or the distant cry of a bird. For a few days, I reveled in this peaceful normalcy. The town, though small, had a timeless allure. The general store, the cafe with its perpetually steaming coffee pot, and the quaint post office seemed untouched by the passage of time. There was something comforting in their simplicity, in the routine nods and greetings shared with the few residents I encountered. It was during one of my evening strolls that I first noticed something peculiar. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and violet. As I ambled down the narrow path leading back to my cabin, I felt a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of something inexplicable that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if the town itself had exhaled, a gentle sigh that rustled the leaves and sent a shiver through the trees. I paused, straining to hear or see what had changed, yet everything appeared as it should be. The path was empty, the trees standing silent sentinels in the dimming light. Dismissing it as a trick of the mind, I returned to my cabin, convincing myself that the isolation and solitude were playing tricks on me. However, the feeling of unease lingered, growing with each passing day. The townspeople, though polite, seemed increasingly distant. Their conversations, once warm and inviting, became clipped and guarded. I noticed how their eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite place whenever I mentioned my walks or the beauty of the surrounding woods. It was as if a shadow hung over their words, a shared secret that pressed heavily on their shoulders. The true escalation of my apprehension began on the night of the full moon. I had been restless, unable to focus on writing, so I decided to take a late-night stroll, hoping the cool air would soothe my racing thoughts. The town was eerily quiet, the moon casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. As I wandered through the empty streets, I felt increasingly aware of the weight of the town around me, as if its very essence was watching, waiting. I found myself drawn to the town center where the church stood, a modest, whitewashed building with a steeple that reached towards the heavens. It seemed to pulse with an energy that was both inviting and foreboding. I stood before it, and as I did, a chill ran through me, a sense of recognition that transcended logic and reason. It was as if the town was alive, sentient, and I was an intruder in its midst. The following days passed in a haze of confusion and dread. My dreams were plagued by vivid imagery of the town, the forest, and the people, all merging into a distorted tapestry of shadows and whispers. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that something was moving outside my window, only to find nothing but the stillness of the night. The townspeople continued their daily routines, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, their eyes following my every move. The cabin, once a haven, now felt claustrophobic, its walls closing in with each passing hour. I tried to leave, to pack my belongings and escape this inexplicable unease. But each attempt was thwarted by some unforeseen circumstance. A flat tire, a sudden storm, a tree fallen across the path. The climax of my ordeal began one stormy evening. The wind howled through the trees, and rain lashed against the cabin windows. As I sat by the fire, trying to drown out the sound by focusing on my writing, I heard a soft tapping at the door. Hesitant, I opened it to find no one there. The night was inky black, the rain a relentless curtain obscuring any view beyond the porch. I closed the door, only to hear the tapping resume, more insistent this time. With a sense of foreboding, I stepped outside, the rain soaking through my clothes. The town lay shrouded in darkness, and yet I felt its presence all around me, a tangible force that pressed against my skin. The tapping continued, guiding me towards the church, its silhouette stark against the stormy sky. Drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist, I followed the sound through the rain to the church doors, which swung open with a creak as I approached. Inside, the air was still, the shadows deep and consuming. At the altar stood the townspeople, gathered in solemn silence, their faces obscured by shadow. They turned as one to face me, their eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight in a way that seemed almost unnatural. I realized with dawning horror that the town itself was alive, a sentient entity that had ensnared the people within its grasp. They were not mere residents, but extensions of its will, bound to its ancient, unfathomable consciousness. The church was its heart, the pulsing center of its awareness, and I was the latest victim to be drawn into its web. As I stood frozen at the threshold, one of the townsfolk, an elderly woman with eyes that gleamed with unsettling clarity, stepped forward. "You feel it too, don't you?" she whispered, her voice a mixture of resignation and acceptance. "The town has chosen you." Panic surged through me, but as I turned to flee, I found myself unable to move, rooted to the spot by an invisible force. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and I felt a presence within my mind, probing, exploring, understanding. It was as if the town was absorbing my very essence, weaving me into its tapestry of existence. The storm raged outside, but within the church, an eerie calm settled. The townspeople watched, their expressions serene, as if resigned to the fate that awaited me. I felt myself slipping away, my consciousness merging with the town's, becoming a part of something ancient and eternal. I don't know how long I stood there, suspended between terror and acceptance. When the storm finally abated, I found myself outside the church, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. The townspeople were gone, the church once more a silent sentinel in the heart of the town. I returned to my cabin, my mind a tumult of confusion and fear. The sense of connection to the town had not dissipated. Instead, it lingered, a constant presence in the background of my thoughts. I felt its awareness, its sentience intertwined with my own. It was no longer just a location, but a living entity, one that had claimed me as its own. In the days that followed, I attempted to leave once more, yet the pull of the town was insurmountable. Each time I tried, something would draw me back, a relentless compulsion that defied logic and reason. I was caught in its web, bound by an unseen force that ensured I could never truly escape. The townspeople resumed their daily lives, their interactions with me marked by a newfound understanding. They too were bound, yet they accepted their fate with a calm resignation that I struggled to comprehend. The town had chosen them, as it had chosen me, and together we were part of something vast and unknowable. I still walk the paths through the forest, though now I do so with a sense of belonging, of being part of the intricate tapestry woven by the sentient entity that is Hungry Horse. I feel its presence in every rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind, and though I am no longer free, I am at peace with my fate. The town watches over me, its awareness a constant companion in the solitude of the park. It is a guardian and a jailer, an ancient consciousness that exists beyond the comprehension of those who dwell within its boundaries. And though the fear still lingers, a shadow on the edge of my mind, I have accepted my place within its embrace, knowing that I am now a part of the town of Hungry Horse, forever entwined with its mysterious, sentient spirit. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where time seemed to stop. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a picture of suburban tranquility. The houses were meticulously kept with neat gardens and white picket fences, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a gentle pace. My family had moved here when I was just a child, and now, as an adult, I found myself drawn back to its quiet charm, to its promise of peace and simplicity. It was early autumn when I arrived, the air crisp and tinged with the smell of fallen leaves. The trees were ablaze with color, their fiery hues reflected in the calm waters of the town's central lake. I rented a small, cozy cottage on the edge of the woods, seeking solace and inspiration for my writing. The days passed uneventfully at first, each one blending seamlessly into the next. I took long walks through the woods, letting the rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds soothe my mind. Life in Willow Creek was serene, almost idyllic, until one evening when the first shadow of disquiet fell over my peace. I was walking home from the local market, the sun dipping below the horizon, when I noticed an odd silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a palpable stillness that hung in the air, as if the world were holding its breath. The usual sounds of twilight, crickets chirping, owls hooting, were conspicuously absent. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the gravel path, echoing in the heavy quiet. As I neared my cottage, I saw something out of place. A small gathering of the town's older residents, standing in a semicircle in the clearing at the edge of the woods. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces stern and focused. Curiosity piqued, I paused in the shadows to observe. They were performing what appeared to be a ritual, their movements deliberate and synchronized, as if following an unseen conductor. A chill ran through me, and I hurried home, pushing the unsettling scene from my mind. The following days were marked by an increasing sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that the town was hiding something beneath its calm veneer. My dreams became restless, filled with whispers and shadows, fragments of memories and fears I couldn't quite grasp. Each morning, I awoke with a jolt, my heart racing, but the details of the dreams slipped away like smoke. I began to notice subtle changes in the people around me. Their smiles seemed strained, conversations stilted. The once warm and friendly townsfolk now seemed distant, their eyes avoiding mine. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or if something truly sinister was at play. I tried to dismiss these thoughts, attributing them to the influence of the isolation and my overactive writer's mind. One rainy afternoon, I decided to visit the town library, hoping to find distraction in its musty shelves. The librarian, Mrs. Hendricks, greeted me with a thin smile, her eyes flickering with an unspoken apprehension. I wandered the aisles aimlessly, my fingers trailing along the spines of books until a particular volume caught my eye. It was an old, leather-bound tome, its cover embossed with strange symbols. Intrigued, I opened it to find it filled with detailed accounts of local folklore and rituals, many of which I had never heard of, despite growing up here. Among the tales was a section on the silence, a forbidden ritual said to be performed to appease the spirits of the forest. According to the book, the ritual demanded absolute silence, and any disturbance could awaken a dark presence, one that would bring misfortune and madness. The description was unsettling, stirring something deep within me. I looked up to find Mrs. Hendricks watching me closely, her expression unreadable. "Be careful with that one," she said softly. "Some things are better left undisturbed." I left the library with the book tucked under my arm, my curiosity outweighing my apprehension. That night, as rain pattered softly against the windows, I read through its pages, losing myself in the eerie stories and ominous warnings. The account of the silence lingered in my mind, its details vivid and haunting. As days turned into weeks, the town's unease seemed to grow. The air was thick with tension, an invisible weight pressing down on us all. My dreams grew darker, filled with twisted echoes of the ritual, the silence spreading like a creeping fog, smothering all sound. It was on a particularly stormy night that the tension finally snapped. I was awoken by a loud crash, as if something had struck the side of the house. Heart pounding, I stumbled out of bed and peered outside. The storm raged, wind howling through the trees. In the distance, I saw a flicker of movement, a group of figures emerging from the woods, their forms barely visible in the darkness. They moved with purpose, heading towards the town square. Drawn by a compulsion I could not resist, I dressed quickly and followed the path into town. The streets were deserted, the storm having driven everyone indoors. I reached the square to find the same group of townsfolk I had seen weeks ago, gathered in the pouring rain. They were chanting softly, their words drowned out by the storm, their faces illuminated by the sporadic flashes of lightning. I watched from the shadows, my curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. The ritual seemed to reach a crescendo, their voices rising despite the gale. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, they fell silent. An eerie stillness descended, as if the storm itself held its breath. In that silence, I felt it, a presence, vast and ancient, watching from the shadows. It was as if the world around me had shifted, revealing another layer of reality, one filled with unspeakable dread. My heart raced, and I took an involuntary step back, the sense of being an intruder overwhelming. The silence broke with a scream, a piercing, soul-chilling sound that cut through the night. It was followed by a cacophony of whispers, a chorus of disembodied voices echoing through the square. The townsfolk stood frozen, their faces masks of horror. The presence pressed closer, a suffocating weight that threatened to engulf us all. Panicking, I turned and ran, driven by an instinctive need to escape. The world around me seemed to blur, time stretching and twisting as I fled. I stumbled through the woods, branches clawing at my clothes, until I reached my cottage. Safe inside, I bolted the door and collapsed against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm raged on outside, but inside my cottage, the silence was absolute. It was as if the ritual had torn a hole in the fabric of reality, letting something through that should never have been disturbed. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize the night's events, but the fear was too deep, too visceral to dismiss. In the days that followed, the town seemed to return to normal, the townsfolk moving about as if nothing had happened. Yet, a shadow lingered, an unspoken understanding that something had changed. The dreams persisted, filled with darkness and whispers, the sense of an unseen threat lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I tried to reach out to others, to find someone who shared my experience, but each attempt was met with polite dismissal, their eyes sliding away from mine as if acknowledging the truth would make it real. I was left with a lingering fear, an understanding that the world was not as simple as it seemed. And so, I remain in Willow Creek, my days passing in a blur of normalcy, undercut by an undercurrent of dread. The woods still call to me, their shadows deeper and more inviting than ever before. I resist the urge to return to that clearing, to confront the silence that looms over us all. The presence is still there, watching, waiting, biding its time. In the quiet moments, when the world holds its breath, I hear the echoes of that night, a reminder that some things are best left undisturbed. In the small southern town of Pine Hollow, nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, life moved at a leisurely pace. The townsfolk were friendly, if a tad reserved, and the streets were lined with charming old-world shops that seemed untouched by time. I moved to Pine Hollow 12 years ago, seeking solace after the chaos of city life had taken its toll. Here, I found peace in its simplicity and the gentle rhythm of the seasons passing by. My small cottage, covered in creeping ivy and surrounded by towering pines, became my sanctuary. The woods nearby were a constant allure, a vast, untamed wilderness where I often wandered, losing myself among the towering trees and the soft rustle of leaves. There was a certain magic in the air, an ancient whisper that seemed to weave through the branches and settle in the soil. Most evenings I would sit on my porch, sipping tea and watching as the shadows grew long and the sky turned a deep indigo. Life in Pine Hollow was as normal as one might expect in such a quaint locale. The townsfolk gathered at the general store to exchange gossip. Children played in the fields, and the local diner, with its checkered floors and faded booths, served as the heart of the community. It was a simple life, one that I cherished deeply. This tranquility was first disturbed one crisp autumn morning. I remember it vividly, the way the air felt electric, charged with something I couldn't quite place. As I made my way to the woods, intending to gather some wild herbs for tea, I noticed an unusual quiet. The birds, typically a chorus of songs, were silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon a peculiar sight. Deep gouges marred the trees, as if a colossal creature had raked its claws along their trunks. The earth was disturbed, torn and churned, as though something had been dragging itself through the forest. My heart quickened, a sense of unease settling over me. Perhaps it was a bear, I thought, seeking refuge and food as the weather turned colder. Yet, the marks didn't match any animal I knew, and there was an unsettling aura about them. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was simply my imagination running away with me, and continued my gathering. As the days passed, the disturbances became more frequent. Strange noises echoed through the woods at night, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. On more than one occasion, I awoke to find strange footprints in the soft earth outside my cottage, large and clawed, unlike anything I had seen before. Each morning, I would wipe them away, hoping to erase the fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. It was during one of these uneasy nights that I first saw it. Peering out my window, I noticed a shadow moving amongst the trees, a hulking figure that slinked between the trunks with an unnatural grace. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see, knowing instinctively that whatever it wasn't of this world. The shadow paused, turning its head towards me, and though I could not see its eyes, I felt its gaze pierce through the darkness, locking onto mine. The days that followed were fraught with tension. The townsfolk began to speak in hushed tones, sharing stories of missing livestock and glimpses of something monstrous lurking in the night. Fear hung over Pine Hollow like a shroud, unseen but palpable. Children were kept inside after dark, and for the first time, the woods felt less like a haven and more like a threat. Driven by a need to understand, I began to explore deeper into the forest, my curiosity outweighing my fear. I discovered a series of caves nestled at the base of a steep hill, their yawning mouths hidden beneath a canopy of tangled vines. Intrigued, I ventured in, the air cool and damp against my skin, The deeper I went, the more I felt that I was not alone. The sense of an unseen presence lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. It was in these caves that I stumbled upon a revelation. The walls were lined with crude drawings, ancient depictions of creatures that bore a striking resemblance to the shadow I had seen. But more than that, there were symbols, markings that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Among the drawings, I found a depiction of a man, a figure standing amidst the creatures, his arms raised as if commanding them. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. Someone, some entity within Pine Hollow, was controlling these creatures, manipulating them for some unknown purpose. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, a mystery unfolding before me that I was determined to solve. As I delved deeper into the mystery, the incidents in town escalated. People began to disappear, vanishing without a trace. The town was gripped by panic, the air thick with fear and suspicion. The once vibrant streets were now shadowed by anxiety, whispers of something dark lurking just out of sight. One night, as I returned from the caves, I heard it again, the low growl that had haunted my dreams. But this time it was closer, much closer. My pulse quickened as I turned, my flashlight casting a shaky beam into the darkness. There, emerging from the shadows, was the creature. It was massive, its body covered in matted fur, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It loomed over me, its presence radiating an aura of malevolence that sent a shiver down my spine. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat, and as I did, a figure stepped from the shadows beside it. A man, tall and gaunt, his eyes dark and hollow. He stood calmly, his gaze unwavering as he regarded me. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a soft, eerie echo. The creatures, I realized, were not just beasts, but extensions of his will, manifestations of his dark intent. He moved with a purpose, a quiet menace that belied the chaos he commanded. I knew then that the peace of Pine Hollow, the life I cherished, was under threat from something far beyond my comprehension. The climax of this revelation came one storm-laden night. The sky was a tumultuous sea of clouds, lightning illuminating the town in stark, erratic bursts. I had gathered the townsfolk, sharing what I had discovered, urging them to stand together against the unseen terror. It was a desperate bid, a last effort to protect our home. As we stood, united in our fear and determination, the storm reached its zenith. The creatures emerged from the woods, eyes glowing, their forms silhouetted against the flashes of light. And there, at their helm, stood the man, his presence commanding and terrible. The air was charged with a palpable tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the battle to come. We fought not with weapons, but with resolve. The community, once fragmented by fear, stood as one, a wall of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The creatures hesitated, their advance faltering under the weight of our unity. In that moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in the man's eyes, a crack in the facade of control he wielded. The storm raged on, a cacophony of sound and fury, obscuring the line between reality and nightmare. As lightning split the sky, I caught a final glimpse of the man, his expression twisted in anger and frustration as he realized his grip was slipping. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the storm began to recede, the creatures retreating into the woods, their forms swallowed by the darkness. In the aftermath, a fragile peace settled over Pine Hollow. The town, though shaken, remained whole, bound by the shared experience of confronting the unknown. But the fear did not leave us entirely. It lingered, a shadow at the edges of our vision, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. I returned to my cottage, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay beneath the veneer of normalcy. The woods, once my refuge, now stood as a testament to the darker depths of the human soul. Yet, there was a strange comfort in knowing that we had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, even if only for a time. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, life resumed its gentle pace. But at night, as I sat on my porch and watched the stars blink into existence, I could not shake the feeling that the darkness was still out there, waiting. The thing in the dark, though driven back, was not gone. It lingered, a silent presence in the heart of the night, a reminder of the fragile barrier between the known and the unknown. And so, I remained vigilant, ever watchful for the day when the shadows would rise again. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden hue over the small town that lay nestled between the hills and the expansive forest. It was a place that seemed to have been forgotten by time, where life moved at a pace that suited the gentle, winding roads and the whispers of the wind through the trees. The townsfolk went about their daily routines with a shared sense of normalcy, a quiet understanding that nothing much ever changed here. I had moved to this town a few months back, seeking refuge from the frenetic chaos of city life. The town offered a simple peace, a chance to reconnect with the world around me, and perhaps, more importantly, with myself. Each day, I would walk the length of the main street, exchanging nods and mild pleasantries with the locals. It became a ritual, an affirmation that I was a part of this serene little community. One particular morning, as I prepared my coffee and listened to the soft patter of rain against the windows, an odd announcement crackled over the radio. It was an eerie disruption of the usual broadcast, a calm voice stating that emergency services would not be covering our area today. I paused, the steaming mug halfway to my lips, caught off guard by this uncharacteristic message. There were no explanations, no hurried attempts to reassure the populace, just a simple, unnerving declaration. The day continued, albeit with a peculiar undercurrent of unease. In a town where the most significant event might be a church bake sale or the occasional high school soccer game, this announcement felt like a dark cloud casting a shadow over our sheltered existence. Conversations in the local cafe, usually lively with the day's gossip, were muted, as though everyone was reluctant to give voice to their fears. As the hours passed, I noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The usual rhythm of the town seemed disrupted. When I ventured into the main square later that afternoon, I found clusters of people huddled together, their eyes darting with suspicion and worry. The sense of community that had drawn me here seemed to fray at the edges, unraveling with quiet tension. By evening, the skies had darkened, and the rain turned into a relentless downpour. I found myself drawn towards the town hall, where a gathering had been hastily organized. The room was filled with murmurs and shuffling feet. The air was thick with an ill-defined anxiety. The mayor, a stocky man with a perpetual frown etched into his weathered face, stood at the front, attempting to project calm and control. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, emergency services have been temporarily suspended. We have been assured that this is a precautionary measure and will be resolved shortly. There is no immediate danger, but we urge you all to stay vigilant and take care of each other. His words were meant to reassure, but they fell flat, leaving behind an echo of unease. Whispers of concern rippled through the crowd, and I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. In the depths of my mind, a voice whispered that something was amiss, that the very fabric of our reality was beginning to warp. The first disturbance came that night as the wind howled with an intensity that seemed almost alive. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows cast by the flickering street lamps outside. A sense of foreboding gripped me, an unshakable feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something terrible. The next morning, I awoke to find the town in a state of disarray. Overnight, it seemed, an invisible line had been crossed. People were missing, their absence like gaping holes in the fabric of our community. Doors were left ajar, cars abandoned in the streets, and the usual hum of daily life was replaced by an oppressive silence. The radio, usually a source of quaint music and local news, now spewed a continuous static, refusing to acknowledge our pleas for answers. The streets, once a place of comfort and familiarity, had become a landscape of unease. I wandered through the town, a silent observer to the unraveling of order. Rumors began to spread, like wildfire through dry brush, of strange occurrences and shadowy figures lurking at the edges of the town. People whispered of a curse, an ancient malediction that had finally resurfaced to claim its due. The rational part of my mind dismissed these tales as mere superstition, yet a part of me, a deeper, more instinctual part, could not entirely shake the feeling that there was more truth to them than I cared to admit. Days melded into each other, a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. The rain continued to fall, relentless and unyielding, transforming the roads into rivers of mud and debris. The town, once so alive with the laughter of children and the chatter of adults, now lay dormant, a husk of its former self. Food supplies began to dwindle, and the realization that we were entirely cut off started to sink in. The absence of emergency services meant that even the smallest mishap could turn catastrophic. People turned inwards, barricading themselves in their homes, their once open doors now slammed shut against the unknown. One evening, as the sky bled into an inky blackness, I noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the dying sun. But as the moments passed, the flicker became more pronounced, taking the shape of a figure standing at the edge of the forest. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted into the encroaching dark, trying to discern its features. It stood there, silent and unmoving, as though waiting for something or someone. A primal part of me screamed to flee, to lock my doors and hide from the entity that watched with an unnerving patience. But curiosity, coupled with a foolish bravery, compelled me to step closer. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and an indefinable malice. As I approached, the figure seemed to draw back, retreating into the shadows of the trees. I stopped, a stone's throw away from where it had stood, my breath escaping in ragged gasps. The forest loomed, dark and foreboding, its haunting presence a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay concealed within. I could feel eyes upon me, an unyielding gaze that seemed to penetrate my very soul. With a final reluctant glance towards the depths of the trees, I turned back, my mind a jumble of fear and confusion. The town continued its descent into chaos. Neighbors, once friendly and open, now regarded each other with suspicion, as though any one of us might be the cause of this nightmare. The social fabric, so carefully woven over generations, began to unravel, leaving behind a tapestry of distrust and paranoia. The climax came on a night when the rain ceded to a suffocating fog. It rolled in thick waves, swallowing the town in its cold embrace. I watched from my window as the mist crept along the streets, obscuring everything in its path. The world beyond my door vanished, leaving me in an all-encompassing silence. Then came the screams, haunting, echoing through the fog with a chilling clarity. They rose and fell, a symphony of terror that pierced the quiet night. I found myself frozen, my feet rooted to the spot as the cries of the townsfolk filled the air. It was as though the town itself was begging for salvation, pleading for a reprieve from the crushing darkness that enveloped it. I forced myself to move, stumbling through the door and into the dense fog. The world was a ghostly white, the normally familiar streets now twisted and foreign. Shadows danced at the periphery of my vision, teasing glimpses of the horrors that lurked just out of sight. The screams grew louder, more desperate, as I followed their grisly chorus through the fog-choked streets. It was a cacophony of fear and despair, mingling with my own ragged breaths. I felt the oppressive weight of the mist pressing down on my shoulders, as though it were a living entity intent on consuming us all. And then, as abruptly as they had begun, the screams ceased. An eerie silence fell upon the town, a silence so profound that it seemed to absorb all sound, leaving only the distant rumble of thunder in its wake. I stood there, alone and trembling, at the heart of an empty street, surrounded by the ghosts of a town that had once been my refuge. The fog began to lift, dissipating with the first light of dawn, revealing a landscape irrevocably altered. The town square lay deserted, the echoes of screams still lingering in the air like a mournful dirge. In the aftermath, we emerged from our homes, drawn together by the shared horror we had endured. Faces haggard and eyes hollow, we gathered in the square, seeking solace in each other's presence. The mayor, his usual composure shattered, stood before us, his voice a mere whisper as he addressed the broken remnants of our community. "We will rebuild," he said, his words a fragile promise in the face of the overwhelming loss. "Together, we will find a way through this." But as I looked around at the weary faces and the empty streets, I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the town we had once known and loved was now gone, replaced by an ever-present shadow that would haunt us for years to come. The lingering fear settled deep within my bones as I returned to my home, a constant reminder of the fragility of our existence. The town was no longer the sanctuary it had once been, its peaceful veneer stripped away to reveal the darkness lurking beneath. I often found myself drawn to the edge of the forest, staring into its depths with a mixture of dread and curiosity. The figure I had seen that night remained absent, yet its presence lingered, a specter in the back of my mind. Days turned to weeks, and slowly, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. But the shadows remained, lurking at the edges of our vision, a constant reminder of the horrors we had faced. The town's wounds were slow to heal, and I often wondered if we would ever truly be free of the curse that had claimed us. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, I would sit by my window, watching the shadows lengthen and the winds whisper through the trees. The town lay quiet, but I knew that beneath its surface, the darkness still stirred, waiting for the day when it would rise once more to claim its due. The fear never left, a silent companion in the quiet moments of the night. And though the emergency services had long since resumed their duties, the memory of their absence haunted us, a chilling reminder that sometimes, in the darkest hours, we are truly alone. They say the mind has a peculiar way of weaving mundane reality with threads of imagination, creating a tapestry of experiences that are as vivid as they are unsettling. I had come to believe this notion wholeheartedly, though not through mere abstraction, but through an encounter that left a scar deeper than any physical wound could etch. It all began in our suburban neighborhood, where the streets were lined with neat rows of houses, each identical in their modest charm, yet distinct in their essence. Our home was nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, a place that offered both the comfort of seclusion and the eerie silence that came with it. Beyond our backyard lay the expanse of dense woods, a dark, tangled realm that was rarely ventured into, save for the occasional adventurous child or the errant hiker. Life in the neighborhood followed its own rhythm, a series of predictable beats that composed a soothing melody of existence. The sun rose, casting golden light over the dew-kissed lawns, and the children would make their way to school, their laughter echoing down the streets like a forgotten song. The evenings were a tapestry of quiet conversations and the occasional bark of a dog. This was the melody of normalcy, one that lulled us into the comfort of routine. One evening, as twilight cast its indigo cloak over the suburb, the phone rang. It was an old rotary phone that sat in the hallway, a relic of a bygone era that refused to surrender to modernity's siren call. The shrill ring was jarring, an unwelcome intrusion into our serene abode. I picked up the receiver, expecting the familiar voice of a neighbor or a distant relative. Instead, what I heard was the unsettling echo of silence, a void that seemed to reach out from the other end of the line. "Hello?" I repeated, my voice mingling with the static hum that filled my ear. There was no response, only the faint sound of breathing, as if someone were drawing long, deliberate breaths into the receiver. "Is anyone there?" I asked again, my voice now tinged with irritation, but the line went dead, leaving only the echo of my question hanging in the air. I dismissed the call as a prank, the work of some bored teenager testing the boundaries of rebellion. Yet, as I returned the receiver to its cradle, a shiver traced up my spine, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease that I could not quite shake off. As days turned into nights, the calls persisted. Each time, there was nothing but the same heavy breathing, a rhythmic cadence that seemed to mock my growing apprehension. I tried blocking the number, but it was always untraceable, a ghost in the network that refused to be pinned down. The woods behind our home, which once seemed a benign barrier, now loomed like a dark sentinel, whispering secrets in a language only it could understand. At night, when the world was draped in shadows, I would stand by the window, staring into the depths of the forest. I imagined eyes staring back, watching, waiting. The feeling of being observed seeped into the corners of my mind, an insidious presence that turned my sanctuary into something sinister. It wasn't long before the boundaries of my world began to blur. Shadows played tricks on my eyes, and the innocuous sounds of the house settling took on a menacing timbre. The phone calls, once a nuisance, became a harbinger, a reminder that I was no longer alone in my solitude. There was someone out there, a specter that had crossed over from the realm of anonymity to haunt my waking hours. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the phone rang again. This time, however, there was a voice, distorted and distant, as if carried over a vast chasm. It was low and gravelly, a chilling whisper that felt like nails raking across my skin. "Do you know what's in the woods?" the voice asked, each word a deliberate provocation. "What do you want?" I demanded, my facade of calm cracking under the weight of fear. "Be careful," the voice replied, ignoring my question. "You never know what's watching." The line went dead, leaving me with the echo of those parting words. For the first time, I felt truly isolated, as if an invisible barrier had been erected between me and the world outside. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood, the rustle of leaves, the distant wail of a siren, now seemed foreign, tainted by the knowledge that someone, or something, was out there. As the days wore on, the woods became the focal point of my dread. I avoided looking at them, yet I could feel their presence pressing against my consciousness, a dark entity that had taken root in my mind. I began to see figures in the shadows, glimpses of movement that vanished as soon as I turned my gaze. The line between reality and imagination blurred further with each passing day, until even my own reflection seemed alien. My sleep was fractured, haunted by dreams of a faceless figure lurking in the forest, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. I would wake, drenched in sweat, the echoes of my own screams bouncing off the walls. The exhaustion seeped into my bones, leaving me fragile, a shell of my former self. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. A sound that was not of the house, but of the woods. It was a crackling, roaring noise, a chorus of despair that shattered the silence. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest was ablaze, a wall of flames consuming the trees, painting the sky with a hellish glow. Instinct propelled me outside, where other neighbors had gathered, drawn by the inferno's siren call. We watched in horror as the fire devoured the woods, its tendrils reaching towards the heavens. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the distant cries of animals fleeing for their lives. As I stood there, captivated by the destructive beauty, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a neighbor, but there was no one there. The touch was cold, yet it left a burning imprint on my skin, a reminder of the unseen presence that had haunted me for weeks. The fire seemed to burn for an eternity, but eventually it was subdued, leaving behind a charred wasteland where the forest once stood. The neighborhood returned to its uneasy silence, but the damage was irrevocable. The woods, once a formidable barrier, were now a barren expanse of ash, a reminder of the night terror had visited our quiet enclave. Yet, even as the physical danger receded, the psychological scars remained. The phone calls ceased, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, and the sound of breathing haunted me still. I began to doubt my own sanity, questioning whether the events had been real or a manifestation of my mind unraveling under the strain of fear. The boundaries of reality had been pushed to their limits, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. In the weeks that followed, I tried to reclaim the fragments of my life, to patch together the semblance of normalcy that had been torn asunder. But the lingering fear remained, an ever-present shadow that stalked the edges of my consciousness. Even in the light of day, I could feel its weight, a reminder that in the depths of the woods and the recesses of the mind, darkness could and did dwell. The neighborhood, once a haven, now seemed a gauntlet to navigate. Each creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, was imbued with menace. I found myself walking through life on tiptoe, wary of disturbing the fragile peace that had settled like dust on a forgotten shelf. As summer turned to autumn, the charred landscape began to heal. New growth pushed through the blackened earth, a testament to nature's resilience. But within me, the aftermath of that fire burned on. I knew I would never again look at the woods or the world in quite the same way. Perhaps it was the isolation, the silence that amplified every sound, that nurtured the seeds of my fear. Or perhaps it was something more insidious, a force that dwelled within the woods, now unleashed by its fiery baptism. Whatever the truth, it had left an indelible mark on my soul. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed at rest, I would sometimes hear the phone ring, but I no longer had the courage to answer. Instead, I would sit in silence, listening to the echoes of my fear, knowing that some doors, once opened, could never be truly closed.